Recording in progress.
All right. So now we are recording. So today we're going to talk about George Jenkins Sr. We're going to give his response to his son's comments because obviously his son made a lot of statements about, hey man, look, my father wasn't there. You know, he was absent in my life for a lot of things. He missed a lot of opportunities in my life. Today we're going to hear the father's response, which I thought was very, very powerful because typically, and including myself as well, I'm speaking from personal experience. I'm 46 years old. I still don't know why my mom and my dad is not together. I don't know, and I guess in a certain kind of way, I didn't want to know, I guess, you know. But in this story, we have George Jenkins Sr. responding to his son's comments. And as I stated on the call last week, when you read the father's comments, you don't necessarily excuse the behavior, but you understand things a lot better. You know, because a lot of times when a husband and wife divorce, you hear one side of the story. The kids rarely ever hear the other side. But sometimes the other side is very, very helpful to help a kid understand why they don't have confidence, why my father wasn't around. You know, that can be a number of reasons. Maybe the mother didn't want the father around. Maybe the mother was sheltering, the kids from their father. We don't know. And you'll never know until, those questions are asked. So in this book, we have the father's response. So let me recap because right now we 10:08 and I got a lot to cover. And I also want to have a discussion about this. So let me recap. And then after that, we're gonna go ahead and get started. But give me 1 second, okay? All right. All right. You guys can hear me well. Everybody's good. You guys can hear me. Just give me 1 minute. All right. So obviously last week we talked about the character George Jenkins. Okay. Let me just recap his story real quick. Okay. George Jenkins grew up as a single father. I mean, sorry, as a boy without his father, as I stated earlier. Okay. And the beautiful thing about George's story is that although he didn't have a father's presence in his life, he had a lot of great people in his life to help him navigate a lot of situations to make him the doctor that he is today. Okay, for example, Ella May was a babysitter. I'm sorry, not Ella May, Willa May. I'm sorry. Willa May was his babysitter. There was no relation to George. She was just somebody who babysitted him. They wasn't related in any kind of way. That wasn't his aunt or anything like that. She was just somebody that stepped in and helped his mother to babysit George. And that was very instrumental in his life because he liked Willa May. Willa May was a character. We also had Reggie. Reggie was somebody he met when he was 15 years old. Reggie was 18 at the time. But although Reggie and George was only 3 years apart, he looked up to Reggie because Reggie was somebody who at 18, he had already had a kid and he had a girlfriend and he was working to take care of his kid. And Reggie taught him about sex. Now, when we was on the call last week, I brought that up because Reggie was somebody who was not too far ahead in age from him, but that's who he got his information from about sex. Okay, now typically we try to have that conversation with kids as parents, but Reggie was somebody that taught him about sex, somebody 3 years older than him. So we pointed that out last week in the story. Okay. So in addition to that, we also talked about the stepdad. So George's mother, George had an older brother named Garland. And after George was born, not long after, his mother got back with Garland's father. Okay, so they had kind of a back and forth relationship. Okay, and then during George's college years, she wound up getting back with Garland's father. Okay, so we talked about the stepdad. Okay, we talked about how George struggled navigating confrontation in his life, and he felt that was a result of him not having a father to teach him where to draw the line as it relates to confrontation. Okay. He had a good counselor in his life. The counselor in his life, she was a teacher. Her name was Viola Johnson. Okay. Now Viola Johnson was instrumental because not only was she a teacher, but she helped him to have a broad perspective about his life, about his future, because she brought them on field trips. Okay. And those field trips gave him exposure. And that exposure helped him to open his eyes to new things. Okay. So she kind of expanded his thinking because he grew up in the projects. I forgot to state that earlier. He grew up in the projects. So in the projects, in the environment that he was in, he didn't see a whole lot of positive things. So Viola Johnson, which was a teacher, she opened his eyes to different things and gave him that exposure, which helped him navigate life. Okay. Let's see who else. Cash taught him self-defense. Cash grew up with his father, Shaheed Jackson, and Shaheed Jackson was like a mentor and also a father figure to George. So we talked about that as well. Okay. We talked about friendship. George had three real good friends, Sam and Remek. Okay. Now they're important because in the book, Sam and Remek made a pact to be doctors. And these are the three doctors. You have George Jenkins, you have Sam, and you also have Remek. Okay. In conclusion, George stated that he suffered and he struggled through life without having a father. It stripped him of his confidence. He didn't know how to shave. He didn't know how to tie a tie. He didn't have anyone to show him how to be a man. Okay. And also he states in the book that a woman cannot teach a boy to be a man. That's his comment. Okay, that's what he said. Okay. He said he was a go-getter. So George identified as a go-getter. And one of the things that disappointed him with his father is that he didn't see that same type of go-getter attitude in his father. He wanted to know where was his father's drive, where was his hustle, because throughout his life, his mother was the one that took on a second job if she needed to take on a second job. She was the one that would do whatever she needed to do in order to make sure George Jenkins got through school. So when George Jenkins was young, he had a neutral attitude toward his father. He said, well, you know what, man, my father's not here, but if he wanted to be here, he would be here. But throughout the course of his life, him seeing his mama struggle by herself to put him through school, he grew to resent his father. We talked about that last week. He started to resent his father. Before he was neutral. He was like, man, my father's not here, but I know he means well. Eventually he's going to get around to coming in my life. But he grew to resent his father. Okay, we talked about that last week. Okay. The last thing I'm going to point out is dating. He struggled through dating. He didn't know how to navigate relationships because he never saw a mother and a father engage one another. He didn't know how to be relational with a woman. He didn't know how to do that. He struggled because he didn't have a father. He grew up with his mother, but that's one-sided. He's a man. He's growing up to be a man, So the other side was missing. How do a man interact with a woman? How do they come to conclusions on what to eat? You know, what to cook? He didn't know. He struggled with that. He didn't know what love was. He talked about that in the story. Okay. All right. So that's it. So that's the recap. Hopefully, with that, you know, everybody kind of got a picture, you know, of his story and what he shared. So now what I'm getting ready to do is I'm getting ready to go into his father's response. Okay, because George made a lot of comments. You know, my daddy wasn't there. My daddy watched my mother struggle. He didn't have any drive. He didn't have any hustle. Well, George Jenkins got a response to that. Okay, and we're getting ready to get into it. Before we get into it, I have a request. And I think everybody know what that request is. If you've been on the calls for a number of times, my request is that everybody turn their cameras on. It's just a request. Obviously, you know, I can't make anybody do anything, but that's just a request. You know, it just shows unity among the organization. You know, it's good for everybody to kind of see one another's face because you may have to talk to one of these people. You know, you may have to engage with one of these people. And, you know, it's just a good thing. All right. All right. So here it is. I'm getting ready to get into the story. Okay. Here it is. This is George Jenkins Sr. speaking. If you would have told me when I was a young man that my son and I would have grew up to be this distant, I wouldn't have believed you. I always pictured myself having a close relationship with my child, much closer than I was ever able to have with my own parents. When I was searching my soul, honestly, I have to say there were several reasons why things turned out the way it did. But more than anything else, it was sheer geography that robbed me of my closeness with my son. Okay, so he's saying because we were so distant, that's why we didn't have a good relationship. That's what he's saying. Okay. I spent most of my adult life in rural South Carolina, a rural South Carolina town called Woodrow. It's a humble little place with just one main street, Highway 441, running through it. The population is about 90% Black, and families have lived there for generations. I was born here on February 3rd, 1942, and today I'm still living in the home that my family built. Once my once my wife departed, taking George and Garland with her and leaving me with an empty house, I wasn't in a position to travel up north often to visit them. If only George and I had lived closer, I feel certain that things would have turned out differently. I know that we would have spent time together and created the kind of memories that he ended up missing out on. George is my only child, and I'm proud of him. I also admire the national reputation he has earned. I think the pack tells a wonderful original story. He and his two classmates had such a tight friendship that they kept one another from falling by the wayside. Yet it was painful for me to read this book, to read his book, and to see my role in my son's life reduced to just a handful of paragraphs, and unflattering paragraphs at that. I can't deny that I haven't been the most attentive and affectionate of fathers. It's not something I'm proud of. However, I didn't have much of a roadmap to follow. My parents weren't married. In truth, the facts behind my birth probably set a lot of tongues to wagging in my small town. My mother, a widowed school teacher, was having a baby, and the father of her child was the well-to-do married proprietor of the town's general store. So his mother wind up getting pregnant by a married man. Okay. This sort of news was totally out of the ordinary back then, and especially among the town's Black professional class. I noticed that today, this type of thing has become much more accepted. My mom, Rosalie Bland Jenkins, chose to give me the respectable last name of her deceased husband, Henry Jenkins, who had been a businessman and a farmer. So George Jenkins Sr. is named after her deceased husband, okay, although that's not his father. Okay? I just want to lay that out for you guys. But I'm sure that my arrival had to be an inconvenience. What was she to do? She was already a mother of 6 who worked 2 jobs as a teacher and also keeping afloat a little store that her deceased husband had owned. She didn't have time to care for an infant. So when I was just a few weeks old, she shipped me off to another town in the deep South Carolina woods to be cared for by a friendly couple. So she shipped him off to a couple who I don't really know what their relationship is. The book didn't say, but they wasn't relatives of his, but that's who he wind up staying with. Okay. I live in the home of Annie and David Dentis, until I was old enough to attend school, and I almost never saw my blood family during those years. I thought the Dentists were my family because when I opened my eyes every morning, that's who I saw. I cried buckets when Mr. Dennis died when I was about 6 years old. My sister, who was married to the embalmer who handled Pop's body, spoke to me sharply that day. Look at what his sister told him. What are you crying for? She asked. That's not your father. Elijah Prince is your father. Yes, I knew that Mr. Dennis wasn't related to me, but that didn't stop the feeling I had for the old man, the first that I knew as a father. So he looked at Mr. Dennis as his father, even though it wasn't his biological father. But at 6 years old, Mr. Dennis died. Okay, and it crushed him. A few years later, my mother would pass away. Okay, so Mr. Dennis died, who he knew as a father, but now his mother passed away not long after. A few years later, my mother passed away before I had a chance to bond with her. The Dennises would forever be the parents I felt the most love for when I was a child. When I was old enough to attend school, I came back to Woodrow. I lived with my mom and finally got to know my 6 brothers and sisters. They were much older than me, and most of them had married and gone out on their own. My sister Dorothy, a recent college graduate, was the only one still living at home. Eventually, she left too, and then it was just my mother and me. It was the only opportunity I would ever get to live with a biological parent. I remember my mom as a busy and very businesslike lady. During the precious few years we had together, she taught me to read and write very well. And at night, when she closed the little country store that she had inherited from her husband, she would turn it into a math lesson for me. Together, we would count the coins. I'd do the pennies and nickels. She would count the larger coins. But she didn't lavish a lot of attention on me. So he felt like he didn't get a whole lot of attention from his mom. Okay, now remember, he's still a child. She was just too busy with her job and the back-breaking work of keeping a household running. Back then, that's how parenting was done. Your parents would tell you what to do, and they'd be quick to chastise you if you didn't do it correctly, but they wouldn't go overboard showing affection. Love was an unspoken thing. I didn't understand it then, but I understood it later. And eventually I would see that it would influence my own parenting style. So the way he grew up influenced his parenting and how he treated his son. Back then, of course, schools were segregated, and I went to the local school for colored children, a 4-room building where several grades were taught in the same room. In those days, blacks had to support their own school financially, and when there was no money, the school shut down. And that's exactly what happened. By the time I completed 5th grade, my school ran out of funds and had to close its doors. It's the story of my life. I had to leave my mother again. This time, mother took me to Sumter to live with my uncle, Charles Blanding, and attend school there. So now his mother moved him to go live with his uncle so he can continue school, because the school that he was attending shut down due to the lack of funds. Okay. I came home from Christmas break when I was 11 in 1953, and I found that my mother was terribly sick, so much so that my sister had taken over the store. Mom was bedridden, weakened by diabetes and heart disease. One night during the holiday break, I was minding the store with my sister when my mother's brother, my Uncle Charles, walked in the door and delivered the news. He had gone in to check on my sleeping mother and found her dead. I was devastated. In the fateful instant, my childhood was gone. Earlier, as I bounced from one house to another, my rearing had always been left up to chance. But I always could maintain a slim hope that one day I would know how it feels to be enfolded in a mother's embrace and know that softness. I longed for softness to combat all these hard knocks. So he feels that what he experienced at an early age with the death of Mr. Dennis, and also some other things in his life, it made his life hard. It made him callous, and he longed for affection. And he's saying here that the moment I longed for softness and for affection, especially from my mother, who I didn't get opportunity to know because she shipped me off at a young age, now she's dead. Okay, I just want you guys to follow the story. I'm kind of laying out the groundwork right now. Okay. Now his mother's gone. But from that point on, what happened in my life was up to the good master in me. My sister Lanny stepped in to become my guardian after mom died. She wanted to continue my schooling, so she enlisted the help of my biological father to send me away to a school she had heard about in Camden, South Carolina. Mather Academy, a boarding school for Negro children established by the Methodist Church, had a good reputation. My father agreed that it would be the right thing to do, and he paid my tuition. Elijah Prince and I weren't strangers to each other, so he knew who his daddy was, and his daddy knew who he was. They weren't strangers to one another, but I guess they just never had that conversation. But we're gonna find out. Okay. As I grew older, we would see each other occasionally. We both knew that we were father and son, but we never really talked about it when I was a child. My father was one of the most powerful men in Lee Country with a lot of important business holdings. In addition to his store, he owned a big farm on which he grew corn, peanuts, soybeans, and tobacco. A major employer in our community, he oversaw a team of men who farmed his land. Some summers, he would hire me to work in his fields. So some summers, he went work in his father's business. It gave me a chance to see him every day, although he always treated me impersonally, the way a boss handles an underling. I understood that. My father needed to command respect from his workers, and he couldn't afford to give me special treatment. His wife wasn't happy that her husband had stepped out on her, fathering a child with another woman. She didn't seem to approve of me, nor the occasional overtures that my father made toward me. My father, who subscribed to the newspaper, knew I enjoyed reading the comics, so he let me know that he was saving the funny papers for me. I would drop by his house every once in a while to pick them up. But his wife did her best to humiliate me when I stopped by. Okay, so his wife treated him bad. Okay, she's still bitter behind him stepping out on her. Okay, when I would ring the front doorbell, she would tell me in a pointed voice to come around to the back door, as if she were a white woman and I was a hired help. This was her way of putting me in my place. It hurt to be treated like this. From that point, I vowed that if I ever got married and had children, I would make sure they had the emotional security of knowing they belonged to a family. I felt orphaned and lonely as well at Master Academy. There were so many adjustments to make. I tried to fit in. In my senior year, I applied to colleges as I saw my peers doing. I got accepted to Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina, and I proudly enrolled there in 1959. Listen to this. But quickly, the luster of the college experience wore off. I felt as if I were in a foreign land and that I didn't belong. I looked the part of a country hayseed, with holes in my shoes, and I was struggling to afford necessities. Now, I want to point that out because if you was on the call last week, you learned that George Jr. felt out of place as well when he was in college. He didn't know how to navigate the college space because he felt that his father wasn't there to help him to navigate that space. He was asked to present himself as a professional because he was in dental school. And when you're in dental school, you had to dress a certain way. You had to wear a tie and look presentable. Well, George Jenkins Sr. experienced the exact same thing. So I'm just making the connection there. Okay. So I dropped out of college in 1961, telling myself that I was just taking off a semester and heading for Kansas City, where Lanny had moved. Okay. I admit I was running pretty wild back then in my 20s. When I would get off work, I always looked forward to letting off some steam by partying with friends, listening to music, and having a few drinks. Okay. What I didn't share in my recap of this story is that George also shared that his mother left his father because he had a drinking problem. Okay, I forgot to mention that. But here it is. He getting ready to tell his story. Okay. So this is what he says. He says, I would get off work. He said, when I would get off work, I would always look forward to letting off some steam by partying with friends, listening to music, and having a few drinks. The thing that settled me down was when my sister Lanny and her husband started having problems. In 1967, she made up her mind to leave her husband, and she asked me to move away with her. Lanny was my only blood relative in Kansas City. When I thought about her trying to get reestablished in a new city, I thought I better go along to give her moral support. She had 2 daughters to raise. She and I headed east to check out the cities where our siblings were living. First, we visited our brother Bobby in Washington, D.C. Lanny didn't like it and decided to move back home to South Carolina. Okay, so now his sister, she's divorced her husband. She moved back home to South Carolina. Now, mind you, Lanny is his older sister. So Lanny was somewhat of someone who he could have looked to see how a relationship between a father and um, and a mother work, right? He was able to see that relationship, right, through his sister and her husband. Well, now that relationship is dissolved. So George Jenkins Sr. was never able to see a functional relationship between a mother and a father. Okay, I'm just pointing that out because that's his son's gripe as well. His son's gripe was, I never saw a mother and a father interact with one another in a relationship. And that's the reason why he said he struggled. And his father experienced the exact same thing. Just want to point that out. Okay. She and I headed east to check out the cities where our siblings were living. First, we visited our brother Bobby in Washington, D.C. Lanny didn't like it and decided to move back home. But I loved the excitement of the big city, and I wasn't ready to give it all up and go back to farm life with its dull days of back-breaking work. I decided to head for Rahway, New Jersey, where my sister Rosalie lived. Now, this is important because this is where he met George's mother. I lived in New Jersey from 1968 to 1972. I found a good paying job at an oil company and started to become more settled and stable. It was a sobering period in U.S. history, a time when blacks bonded together to demand change and when assassinations bullets flew. I think the social climate affected me a lot. The nation was making a sharp turn, and I took note of the fact that serious change was needed in my life too. I was in my early 30s and no longer full of youthful immorality. I took an interest in an attractive neighbor of Rosalie named Ella and started thinking about giving up the bachelor life. She was a smart young lady with plenty of common sense. A lot of young ladies I had met seemed frivolous by comparison. She was in her early 20s, but mature beyond her years. She could talk easily and for hours. I enjoyed being in her company. She had a baby boy whom I accepted without question and treated him like he was my own. Talking about Garland. Okay, because remember, when George Jenkins Sr. got with her, she had already had a child. Okay, and that was Garland. She had a child by Hayward Mack, who is Garland's father. Okay, so he was willing to take her, even though she had already had a kid. Okay, he said he liked her. She seemed like to be a sharp woman. So he got with her. He was also willing to take care of the kid, Garland, as well. Okay. I paid for his diaper service and brought the formula he needed. Okay, so he took care of his kids at that time. I wanted to be in her life. I asked Ella to marry me in 1972 when I was about 30 years old. Okay, so that's when he got married. He got married when he was 30 years old. About the same time, I got word that my father was gravely ill with leukemia and that he wanted me to open his store back up for him and to keep it running. I quit my job without hesitation and I moved back to Woodrow in the winter in 1972. A few months later, I met Ella and moved her and Garland down south with me. Okay, so now his real father is sick. Okay, seemed like everybody who's close to him, who's related to him, is dying off. Okay, so now because his father's sick, his father want him to take over the store. So now he's already in New Jersey, but he's moving back home to go and to take care of his father's store. Okay. My father lived until 1976 in the house behind the country store. I've told a lot of people that I wouldn't trade those 4 years I got to spend with him for anything. Finally, we had a chance to talk and interact, and I could see what type of man he was. He was as he trained me in the way he wanted his business to run. I realized he was a deeply principled man. During that time, it was common for shop owners to take advantage of poor Black customers, but he refused to cheat people. A tireless entrepreneur, he believed in working long hours, but he also had a good sense of humor that made the time fly. At the time that I was at the time that I was carving out a first-time relationship with my father, my own son arrived. Okay. So at the time when he was carving out a relationship with his own father, that's when George Jr. was born. Okay. And mind you, his father's dying. So now he got a child that's born, which is supposed to be a time that to be celebrated, but it's hard for him to celebrate it because his father is dying also. So now, rather than take care of his child in New Jersey, he decides to go and take care of his father, right? That can be a tough decision. I got a child that's born in New Jersey, but my father's dying over in South Carolina. That's the picture I want you guys to understand. Okay. After George was born, I made a ritual to close the store at a certain time in the afternoon every day to come home and spend an hour or two playing with him. I loved throwing him up in the air and catching him, and he loved our game too. Once we had a real emergency with him that could have been tragic. George was a toddler at the time, just starting to walk. Excuse me. My two young nieces were supposed to be taking care of him, but somehow he got a hold of a custom jewelry ring, a good sized one. He put it in his mouth, of course, and it got lodged in his throat. Someone from the house ran to get me at the store and told me that I better come quickly. In a matter of minutes, we were in the car taking a long drive to the hospital in Sumter. My sister Lanny drove, and I jumped in the back seat with George, who was crying. It must have hurt bad having a ring like that stuck in his windpipe. I was afraid that the thick ring would block his air passage, so I stuck my finger down his throat and searched for it as gently as I could. It wasn't easy. George was sputtering and crying, and the ring was wedged pretty far down. We were halfway in Sumter before I finally touched the ring and eased it out of his throat. I was so relieved that he didn't choke on it. It seemed like a miracle. Now, obviously, George was probably way too young to even know this happened, but his father saved his life, right? But obviously, he didn't know this. So all the comments he made, he had no idea the things that his father did for him. Okay. When he was real young, his father would take care of him. They would play games. He would throw his son up and down to catch his son. He had a fun time with his son, a joyful time. But obviously, George Jr. would not know that. Right. So he painted this picture like his father didn't care, his father didn't want to be there. It's not true. It's not necessarily true. Okay. Look, before I go any further, I want you guys to know that I understand the time. I see right now with 10:44. I don't have a lot more to read, but I do want to just acknowledge right now that I understand where we are. We 10:44, and we're supposed to wrap up at 11 o'clock. I don't have much more to read. Matter of fact, yeah, I don't have much more to read. I got two more pages to read, and after that, we can have a discussion because I do want us to have a discussion because I want to know how you guys feel about this story now that you have the father's response. So just kind of be patient with me. Let me finish up these next, 2, 3 pages, and after that, we'll have a discussion. Okay. All right. I used to drink some when I lived in New Jersey, mostly on weekends. When I returned to South Carolina, my drinking picked up quite a bit. My brother-in-law operated a juke joint in Woodrow, and I would hang out there after work instead of going home. I started staying out late and drinking the way I did when I was single. I guess I convinced myself that I wasn't doing anything because I wasn't chasing women. Okay. But when I get home, I would be accused of all kind of wrongdoing. I couldn't understand why my wife back then was so disapproving. I realize now that my drinking was pretty clouded by the alcohol. But even in my haze state, I knew something was amiss one night in 1976 when I got home and the house was totally quiet. It was a funny thing. I could feel deep inside me that something was wrong the minute I pulled up in front of the house. I walked in and saw right away that a few things were missing. I walked into the kitchen and found that Ella had fixed me a full dinner and left it on the stove. My family was gone without a word. So Ella fixed his food, took the kids, and rolled out. All right. I had no forewarning, nothing. She didn't even give them a warning she was leaving them. She just packed up the bags and rolled out, 100 kids. I went to both of my sisters who spent a lot of time with Ella and neither seemed to know what was going on. So I decided to take a week's vacation in Washington, D.C. in order to swing through her hometown in North Carolina to talk to Ella face to face. But as I drove to North Carolina, it occurred to me that maybe it wouldn't be a good idea to go to Ella's family house. As I mulled the situation over, I convinced myself that I was the victim. After all, she hadn't told me she was leaving or where she was going. I wasn't even sure she and the boys were in Warrington. Also, her parents were sure to be angry with me. As I drove, I considered the possibility that my presence might create a stormy situation. In the end, I opted to drive past Warrington without stopping, and I headed for Washington, D.C. for a week. It was a very, very hurtful period for me. At first, I felt anger, and then I felt pain. I wished that Ella had told me what her plans was. I felt that I deserved a chance to talk about what was going on in her mind, and maybe we could have saved our marriage. But the way it went down, I was defenseless as well as helpless. I didn't know where my family was until a child support notice arrived from the state of New Jersey more than a year later. Those first years after she left, I drank even more heavily. So now he's going into a deeper downward spiral. I didn't contest the divorce when the papers arrived. I felt like a failure to an extent. There had to be something I wasn't doing right. And that really colored my thinking over the next years when it came to having input in George's life. Since Ella left when he was just a little boy, George seemed far out of my reach in New Jersey during the critical child rearing years that followed. Although Ella's disappearance had hurt me, I certainly thought she was a fine mother, and I admired the good job she was doing with George and Garland. I didn't want to confuse George by intervening and possibly contradicting the principles she was raising him with. And I'm glad I didn't. I think he turned out very well. She did a wonderful job as a single mother, and I'm not sure that I could have contributed anything that would have helped him turn out any better. It's not that I didn't want to be close to him, but I didn't want George to be confused about his loyalties to mom versus those to dad. Whenever I visited, I wouldn't impose my values on him because I didn't want to undercut what she was teaching him. I thought it would be better if Ella called the shots since she was there with him and I was here. I wasn't an affectionate father, not at all. To tell the truth, I never even contemplated whether I was doing it right or wrong. The question didn't even occur to me. But it wasn't a lack of love. I guess it was just history repeating itself. I tried to visit the boys regularly at first and sometimes stayed 2 or 3 weeks at a time during those early years. But after a few years, I couldn't afford to keep it up. When you operate a general store in the country, you didn't earn a lot of money. That's why I had to close the store in 1977 and get a job. I worked a couple of odd jobs around my hometown, but nothing too stable until I got hired in 1971 at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I work there today, setting up rooms and moving furniture for events. It's part-time work that doesn't pay much, but at least it's steady money. I never felt that I could afford to pay monthly child support, and Ella didn't hound me for it. The way I handled it was that I wrote out a check to Ella at the end of each year after I totaled up my business expenses, adding in my share of extra income derived from my family farm. Sometimes I would mail only $300 to her. Other times it was $500 or $600. When I got that first notice from the state of New Jersey, it demanded that I pay her $300 a month, but there was no way I could afford that. I wasn't even bringing in that much per month. At the time, I was grossing only $300. I had to get a lawyer and pay him to get the amount reduced. Likewise, I couldn't afford to visit much, and I couldn't send for George and Garland to come see me. After Ella and the kids left, I moved in with my older sister and rented out my house. Those were fairly lean years for me, and my work schedule didn't have a lot of give in it. I didn't have anyone who could have watched the boys while I was working, which meant summer visits weren't feasible. Listen at this. I had dreams of spending time with my son. I had a glove and a softball and baseball that I must have kept 20 years waiting to play catch with him. He kept that for 20 years. But that day never came. The miles between us became a barrier that I couldn't figure out how to surmount. I admit that I should have done more during his childhood. I should have stayed in better contact. But my dependence on alcohol continued to grow, and as a result, my other priorities seemed to fade in the background. For 12 years after Ella and the boys left, I used alcohol as my preferred means of escaping reality. But in 1984, God managed to get my attention and break that habit. I developed a life-threatening case of liver cirrhosis. My doctor told me bluntly that I would get better and that my liver would regenerate itself if I would just stop drinking. I was finally ready to hear what I had long known. It was time to give up the drinking. That afternoon, I stopped by the liquor store, bought a half pint of vodka, and I took a good sip of it. When I got home, I did a little soul searching. I sat the bottle on top of the linen closet in the bathroom, and I decided to go a week without drinking. Sure enough, I made it through the whole week, and I felt good about what I had done. So I decided to try to make it through an entire month. 10 years later, that vodka bottle was still sitting there untouched when a friend came by to help me fix my washing machine. He asked about the vodka in the bathroom, so I just gave it to him. I had been alcohol-free for a decade. I never looked back since that day. I did it cold turkey, just me and the God above. I hadn't conquered every problem, though. I still smoke cigarettes. I will get around to quitting that one of these days. By the time I stopped drinking for good, George was in high school and I had missed out on his early years. I was hopeful, though, that things between us would change as he got older. I envisioned that as he matured, we would be able to talk man to man and I would explain to him the things I was going through. Then he would get to know me better and I would get to know him better. I thought I had plenty of time. This is good to note here. I thought I had plenty of time, but I guess I had put my money on the wrong horse. I was waiting on a day that so far hasn't materialized. Once George and Garland reached their teens, this is very important for parents to realize, including myself. This is what he says. Once George and Garland reached their teen years, I stopped coming for longer visits because it seemed they wanted to be with their little friends and didn't have a lot of time for me. Now, why am I pointing that out? Because at one time, George wanted his father, all right? But he couldn't get a hold of his father like he wanted to. He didn't have access to his father like he wanted to. But now the tables have turned. Now he wants his sons, but they don't have time for him. Boy, that gives me chills there. But I made it a point to be there for the big events in his life. I'm proud that one time when he wrote me and asked for money to buy a car, I was able to send him the full amount that he asked for. I'm proud that I made it to all of George's graduations, but I couldn't help but see signs that I had waited too long to kindle a relationship. I made a 4-day trip to Newark for George's dental school graduation, but besides the actual graduation ceremony, I only got to see him one time. He and some friends came by my hotel room and stayed for a while. I carry beat up photos of George eaten up from 20 years in my wallet. I have framed copies of articles about him on the wall. But there is more to fathering than just being able to display mementos. And I owe it to my son to try to make a change. That's why I've had to teach myself to tell George I love you when we talk on the phone. It was hard at first. I've always been introvert when it comes to expressing my feelings. I never got to the point with my mother where I could tell her I love her. And it was late in my father's life when I bonded with him. This is all new to me, and I'm only feeling my way. The only roadmap in parenting that we have is what our own parents show us. I don't know what you don't know what you're missing out on until you grow up and become exposed to other ways of doing things. Then the question is, are we able to change? I'm almost done. Now, the one waiting for George's, so now I'm the one waiting for George's attention. Now I'm waiting on him to return my phone calls. I know that his job and his packed responsibilities are time consuming. He travels a lot and is incredibly busy. I believe that time, all things will work out. Things will settle down in George's life one day. And when they do, we will get together. I'm only sorry that when he does get a chance to join me down here in South Carolina, we will have missed out on the opportunity for him to meet so many of his family. All my brothers and sisters has passed on except for Lanny. Now remember, he was a sibling of 6. All of them are dead. So George don't know any of his uncles. He don't know any of his aunts in a real way because they're all dead and gone. Lanny is the only one alive. Still, George has many cousins who are excited about all that he's accomplished. They've seen him on TV and collected his write-ups. He's family. That's the way they think of him, although they don't know him. I continue to invite George to family reunions so he can meet the folks down here who are so proud of him. Perhaps one of these days he'll make time to come. That's it. That's it. That's it for George Jenkins Sr. So, for those of you who were on the call last week, you guys are aware of the story that I laid out with George Jenkins Jr. Well, today you've heard George Jenkins Sr. response. I would love to hear from anyone on what they think about George Jenkins Sr. response.
You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, huh? What you got?
Um, I
You,
think his response was um kind of sad because
Hunter, you
the
sound real
problem.
muffled. You sound real muffled. I'm not sure what's going on, but you sound real muffled. Um, Try again. Go ahead and try again, Hunt.
I think the dad's response was kind of sad because he said he said that he had a drinking problem, but he still wanted to be with his son, but he couldn't because he kept drinking, and that even made the problem worse.
Okay. Anyone else?
I have something to say. I think that is really inspiring, and it's sad because he really did try to be with his son, but when he tried to be with his son didn't have time to be with him. But when the dad had when the dad was drinking and the kid wanted to spend time with him, he wasn't able to. So I think it's sad, and it also teaches people a lesson not to drink and not to smoke.
That's good. That's
I
good.
agree with that.
You agree with that, Tara?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this question. And this is for anyone on the call. Do anybody feel differently towards George Jenkins Sr. hearing his side of the story? Like, do anybody empathize with him hearing his side of the story?
Yes.
Okay. So what part do you empathize with, Tyron?
Like like the fact how like how he regret what he did and like started to oh my God. Um I can start over.
Yeah, sure, man.
Okay. So like the part like where he was like drinking and stuff, like after they left him, that started to change how he would like do things and like he started to try to stop drinking and stuff, and he regret what he did that made his wife break up with him and like leave with the children and stuff.
Yeah, that's good, Tyron. That's real good. Yeah. What I found interesting about his drinking problem is that, and we can kind of discuss this because what I found interesting is that Ella was trying to get him to stop. He wouldn't. It was only till the doctor said, "Hey, look, if you keep drinking, you're gonna die," and that's when he quit cold turkey. So what I found interesting is that the doctor was able to do what his wife wasn't able to do. You know, why wasn't he able to listen to his wife and say, you know what, man, for the sake of my marriage, let me do something about this problem because it is a problem. It wasn't until the doctor told him that if you don't stop drinking, you're gonna die, that he said, okay, this is a problem. I need to stop. So he lost his marriage because of drinking. But it was only until the doctor said, hey, look, if you don't stop this, you're gonna die, that he decided to change. So I found that real interesting. Anybody else want to chime in on what they thought? I would love to hear.
Yeah, what's going on, y'all? Good morning.
Morning.
I wanted to say, man, I felt like I definitely empathize with the fact that he was able to acknowledge his vice and acknowledge with no excuses about like he took total accountability for the fact that is I don't think he said it verbatim, but that his wife at the time was correcting her decision to take the kids away because he was obviously you know um, drunk. He was a drunk at that time. By all definitions, he was a drunk. Couldn't put it down. And I like that part of his message. He didn't blame the woman. He didn't blame the children. He took accountability for the fact that, what I'm saying, he had a problem. And it took him 10 years to get over that problem. Ten years is a long time. You know what I'm saying? 10 years is a long time. No matter how you put it on paper, that's a long time to, like, get over a problem. So you just think about the reality, an altered reality where she decides to stay with the man, and the children are growing up in the household with a father that's a drunkard. That would have for sure been a worse situation for them. It would have been better for them to be in the situation they was for sure. So she made the correct decision to leave him, where he couldn't get over that by himself. But as far as empathizing on the side of him feeling a way about not being a part of his children's life, I mean, after he got over the aspect of getting over his vice, what what stopped him from going to fight full time with his children? What stopped him from moving closer to his children? What stopped him from spending summers with his child? Things like that. And the answer is nothing. So I just feel like when it comes to parents being not available in their children's life, that there is nothing to empathize with because there's so many different avenues that I've seen people go through that do want to be a part of their children's life. I've seen the money they spent. I've seen how much they traveled. I've seen how much they dedicated themselves to. I've seen how much they sacrificed. They might have to lose a job they really like to go work a job they don't want to work so that they can spend more time with their children. So I just want to leave that there, but I did enjoy it.
I think that's what I highlighted too, Larry, that it was really a lack of resources that he had that created a wedge between him moving closer to where they were because he had very little resources. So he wasn't able to send for his kids to come to him, and he couldn't afford to go there. But then he also made a conscious decision, like you said, to take the job of taking over his father's, or I forgot whose store it was, but he chose to pursue that as his means of, making a living. I'm sure he could have chosen to find work closer to them, but that was a decision that he made. I also like to highlight that although he didn't have, I think the comment or the statement in the book was, um, you know, he was the type of parent that he was based off of what he saw growing up. And I think it's important to note, like as a parent, regardless of whether or not we have an example or not, it's so important to me to have a relationship with my God because I don't know. Like I don't know what I'm doing half the time as a mom or even as a wife. But as a believer, I know that I have the power of the Holy Spirit that lives inside of me that can teach me how to be the mother and the wife that I need to be. And so my takeaway is just encouragement for myself to continue to ask the Holy Spirit daily to teach me how to be the mom that each of my kids need me to be. Because regardless of whether or not I saw good parenting in my life, that still doesn't necessarily show me how to be the mother to Hunter or the mother to Avery.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Can
that's
everybody
good.
hear me?
Yeah, who's that? Who's speaking?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, Sharon, what's up, man? I'd love
Yeah.
to hear
How y'all
from
doing? Good morning. Yeah. So, my takeaway from, I guess both sides, I didn't hear, George's side of this, their glimpse of what the story is. But as far as his father, I feel like he's, selfish, right? Not because it's because of what he's seen. Like he was, nobody never stayed there and sacrificed themselves for him. So, his wife leaving, that wasn't enough. It wasn't for him, right? His wife left, his kids left. It only became, he only realized, he needed to stop drinking because he was about to lose himself. And like in anything you do, if you want it bad enough, you're gonna do the things to keep it, to sustain it. You know what I'm saying? And he didn't do that. It only became a problem when it was himself. It wasn't his wife leaving, his kids leaving, none of that. And just for the same sense, he's saying that he couldn't afford to be around his kids because he couldn't afford to do this, he couldn't afford to have them for the summer, but he could. The drinking took a lot of it, but the kids wasn't that important to him at that time. His wife wasn't important to him at the time. So we all choose to put ourselves before some things that really do matter. And that's what he did. They didn't matter at the
you. I tell you what, man, I'm kind of surprised to hear the men come down on George Senior. Boy, I don't seem like y'all got too much empathy for George. Hey, George ain't had no money, man. George living out in another state. But boy, look, y'all saying stuff I thought the women would be saying, man.
Well, I
I'm
time.
think the takeaway,
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
you go ahead,
So
Sherman.
you gotta take it from a person that's been there. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
And I've been on both sides of that in some sort. So I know it is to fight for your kids amongst being fighting for yourself. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't been there. So my empathy toward George Senior is like, come on, man, you could have done more. And that's just me.
And I think what I was going to add, Sherman, was I'm sure the mom felt the same way, but she did what most women do is, okay, well, I got to go get a second job, or I got to go get a third job, or I'm going to ask the village to help me raise my kids. Um, and I think that's the route that most women take as mothers, right? We just gonna get it done. We're going to get it done. I don't know how I'm gonna get it done, but it's gonna get done.
So look, so think about this now, because I don't want y'all to forget about this. He made all major um, functions in George's life. Okay, he was at every graduation. Okay, and as Larry pointed out in the chat, he purchased a vehicle for George as well. So it seemed like he wasn't just a no good father. You know what I mean? I think he could have done more, but it does seem like he was honest in saying that, man, look, it was geography as to why I didn't see my son as often as I could have, because, man, I didn't have the resources and we live far away. And it's very difficult when you don't have resources to be able to make certain things happen, right? Because it costs money. It costs money to travel, to another area to go see your son, you know. But I just wanted to point that out to you guys because it doesn't seem like he was a no good man. It does seem like he has some sort of moral compass, but I think he could have done more nonetheless. Anyone else want to share what they thought about George Jenkins Sr.'s response? right, y'all quiet this morning. Sherm, thank you. Thank you for being on the call, man. It's such short notice. I hope you enjoyed what you heard today.
You're welcome. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, this is a good conversation for a lot of different reasons. And I think your presence on the call means a lot. And as I shared with you on yesterday, I truly believe that these calls are going to be an asset to you as well. You know, we are helping families to get better and to understand things and get educated. And these type of conversations, you know, they're not being had everywhere. You know, matter of fact, I don't know of any place you can go to have this type of conversation. You know, it's a very powerful conversation, and also in some ways, it could be a sensitive topic for some people. You know, it could be a trigger for some people as well. You know, who experience the exact type of thing with their father. You know, some people experience fathers being on drugs, having a drinking problem, and those type of things. You know, and all I can do is share with you the lived experience of someone else, and that's George Jenkins. You know, so the book is pretty much me just sharing his experience. It's not my own opinion. This is a real life experience from someone else. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. What we're going to do is we're going to continue next time with the other character in the book. We may continue with Sam or Remek's story about them growing up without a father and the father's response. So let me figure that out and I'll get back with you guys. So most likely we're going to have 2 more weeks of fatherlessness. All right. So you guys can invite somebody on the call because we spent 2 weeks talking about George. Right. So maybe we'll spend 2 more weeks talking about Sam or Remek. So just let me figure out which one of the characters we're going to talk about. And after that, we may move on. Or if you guys want to continue the conversation of fatherlessness, we can talk about the other character as well and his experience with his father growing up. So we'll kind of play that by ear. But just plan on the next 2 weeks, we're most likely going to talk about the other character and their response with their father. Okay. In closing, anyone else want to share anything? Dana, thank you for having your kids on the call this morning. It means a lot. Do you want to share anything before we close?
Hi, good morning. We're happy to be on today. I mean, I think just listening to the conversations, what came to mind for me is that maturing and growing older, and especially becoming a parent, really reveals to you that at the end of the day, your parents are just human beings, right? Like as a kid, you look at them as some superhero, but they're people with their own flaws and their own baggage and things they're trying to work through. So I don't think that the father was a terrible person. He made mistakes, but he tried the best that he could. And I think that's just an important conversation to have with kids, right? To let them know sometimes I won't always do things perfectly, but I'll always try my best. And so that's what I thought as I heard the conversations. He was being held accountable, but I also think there is room for empathy and understanding that he is just a person trying to figure out his way. And he made a lot of mistakes, but he tried his best. So that's the biggest thing that I thought about as I just listened to the conversations today. And my son and I kind of talked about that too.
Dana, did you enjoy the conversation? Did you enjoy the story?
I did. I did. And what do you think, Dave? Did you enjoy it? Yeah, I like the story. Yeah, as we sat here, he was saying it would be good for the son to know that his dad didn't just abandon him. Although he wasn't doing the right thing, it wasn't his dad's choice initially to just drop out of his life. And he thought that would be helpful for the child to at least know that it's not that he didn't care about him.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's what we're talking about amongst ourselves.
Well, that's good. That's good. And thank you guys so much for being on the call. Anybody else want to share anything? If not, we're gonna close it out this morning. Let you guys go enjoy your Saturday. All right. Nobody else?
I think my
That's
only last comment is just like Larry and I were messaging in the chat about, yes, he did provide some resources to him, to his son. It seems like most kids, they just want the presence of their parents, right? They just want their dad. They just want their mom, even if that means I have my mom, but we may not have all of the things that we need. The fact that my dad was there, or the fact that my mom was there, that seems to weigh heavily with George.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Some of you
See,
were
that,
on the
that's
call. Oh, go
if I
ahead,
could
Larry.
real quick, brother Byron.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's basically what I was kind of in. Anybody can tell a good story, you know what I'm saying? But in every story, if you just listen to it long enough, you get to the part of the story that really kind of acknowledges something that's important. And I really believe that's what's being acknowledged is that, and I really wish like that'd be something that'd be so powerful. And I'm hoping that, with the other two fathers that get to respond to their son's story or whatever, is I think some parents need to just acknowledge, like, at this point in my life, you wasn't important to me. Like, it's showing up for graduations and sending a little money here and there. Like, I had other stuff going on that was more important to you. You wasn't the main priority of my life. I think that's powerful for a child to hear and just acknowledge that and just deal with, instead of it being where, a child has to wrestle with, was I important or wasn't I important? Now the man has gotten older, he's grown more wiser. He's felt the gap more, and he's seeing people around him passing away, and he's longing for that family. So now he's having this kind of 180 in his mind. But at the time that he needed to be present as a father, that just wasn't important to him. I just think they need to be acknowledged.
And, just want
Yeah,
to piggyback on what he just said. It's like that old saying, right? Time waits for no one, right? So you can't get time back. You can always replace gifts and all this other stuff. So kids growing up, and like you said, the early years, he really wasn't there. Like kids look for time, regardless if you sending money, you buying gifts. Time means everything. You can't get time back. So if you're not spending the time, it's like that's what they remember. They don't remember too many gifts and all this. They remember the time that you spent with them. You know what I'm saying? Things y'all did, the places y'all went. Time is everything.
yeah, that's awesome, Sherman. We have a lot to be proud of with this organization because we have a lot of good fathers, man, on these calls. We have a lot of good mothers on these calls. And that's a wonderful thing because what it does is it shows that this is a valuable organization. That's what it shows. Because these are people who care about their children. These are people that care about themselves. And that's what makes a strong organization, right? A strong organization must first have a strong foundation. And we have great fathers. You guys can tell that from the fathers that you've heard speak this morning. These are real fathers. These are real men. And that's what these kids need to see. One thing I do want to point out: some of you were on the call yesterday, some of you weren't, but we talked briefly about the five love languages. Okay, and we may come back to that because we need to learn how to connect with our children, just like George Jenkins Sr. needed to know how to connect with George Jenkins Jr. And the way we do that is by speaking their language. Their not dialect, their language, their love language, right? How do our kids want to be loved, right? We talked about it yesterday. Some kids want to be loved through quality time, right? Some people want to be loved by physical touch. Okay, some people want to be loved by acts of service. Some people want to be loved by receiving gifts. These are the 5 love languages on how people want to be loved. And typically, we try to love someone else the way we want to be loved. But that may work or it may not. So we can touch a little bit more on the love languages, but we did touch on that yesterday for those who weren't on the call. That's what we talked about, the 5 love languages. But there's also, just so you guys are aware, and my wife did this on yesterday, she put in the chat the link to the 5 love languages where you can take a quiz. It's free. I had my kids take this quiz last night. You can have your kids take this quiz. I think it'll be very helpful for them as well as for you to understand what their love language is. Okay. So, Nitra, if you don't mind, if you can put that in the chat. And look, if she don't put it in the chat here, we're
I'm
going
gonna
to
put it in a group text.
Yeah, put it in a group text. That way you guys can have access to that. Let your kid take it. Don't take long. It might be 3 to 5 minutes, man. It don't take long at all. And that'll help you understand your kids because, me and Sherman was talking on yesterday, and we realized it's important for us to understand our kids. It's important for us to have conversation with our kids and not just try to boss them around because we their parents. I mean, it just don't work that way. Our kids need to feel comfortable talking with us, and frankly, we need to feel comfortable talking to them. So it's a two-way thing. So with that, before we leave, I'm gonna just say a quick prayer, and after that, we're gonna go ahead and close. So Heavenly Father, I thank you, God, for this opportunity that you've afforded us, God, to be on the call once again. God, I pray in the name of Jesus that everything that was said this morning, God, would be of some help to someone. There were some seeds that we shared on today, and I pray that those seeds would bring forth the harvest, oh Lord, that these kids' lives may be changed forever in a positive way. God, that they won't lack confidence, God, that they will be emotionally strong, God, that they will be leaders, Heavenly Father. And God, that they won't be ashamed, oh Lord, to do the right thing. God, they won't bow down to anything that goes contrary to their teaching at home. And God, I just thank you, God, for being with us this morning. I thank you for allowing us to have a good meeting and a productive meeting that is changing lives. God, I thank you, and I give your name the glory and the honor. In Jesus' name, amen. All right.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend. That's a wrap.
Man,
Love y'all.
thank you. Y'all have a good day.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
See ya.
Explain it to her.
Later.